Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into a story today that, honestly, it exposes a profound failure in public trust. Especially when you're talking about one of the most vital and, let's be honest, scarce resources in the capital, social housing.
Right.
So today we are doing a deep dive into a case of serious internal housing fraud that was uncovered inside Newham Council.
And this isn't just about, an administrative mistake. This is an internal betrayal. It really strikes at the heart of public confidence.
It really does.
Our mission today is to get past the headlines and really understand not just the fraud itself, but the systemic weaknesses it exploited and the cost, the financial and human cost is just astonishing.
Especially in a borough that's already dealing with one of the worst housing crises in the entire UK.
Exactly.
Okay, so the core issue, the thing you might have seen in the news, is pretty straightforward on the surface. A former council staff member is accused of misallocating 35 social housing properties.
Right, but let's frame that. 35 homes. That might not sound like a huge number in the grand scheme of things, but in Newham,
It's a devastating loss.
it's a devastating loss. It's not a rounding error. These are 35 homes taken out of the legitimate queue and just handed to people who weren't eligible. The scarcity itself, the crushing demand, that's what creates the pressure point for this kind of thing to happen.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The anatomy of the crime, because this is where the deep dive really begins. We know the employee was a housing officer.
Yes.
So they had direct access to the whole allocation process. This wasn't some kind of smash and grab fraud. It was sustained, deliberate manipulation. The sources say they manipulated the systems. What does that actually mean?
That's the critical question. When we say manipulating the systems, we're talking about the digital pathways, the bureaucracy that manages this huge waiting list.
Right.
These systems are supposed to assign properties based on priority scores, things like family size, medical needs, how bad their current living conditions are.
So a staff member in that role has enormous power.
Enormous. They weren't creating, say, 35 fake families out of thin air. It's more subtle.
So they were just changing the rules of the game for people who already existed.
Exactly. They could have done a few things. They could have manually overridden priority scores for certain applicants, just bumping them to the top of the list.
Even if they didn't meet the criteria?
Precisely. Or they could have just bypassed the queue altogether, assigned a property directly, created a paper trail that looks fine on the surface, but it completely ignored the ranking.
So the system itself became the weapon.
It was the tool of the crime, yeah.
And this leads us right to the discovery. I mean, this kind of internal fraud is often so hard to detect. But it wasn't an audit that found it, was it?
No, and that's a really crucial point. It wasn't a proactive audit, which, maybe suggests a weakness in their regular checks.
So how did they find out?
It was a whistleblower, a fellow staff member. Someone on the inside saw suspicious activity and reported it straight to the council's own fraud team.
Wow. So it was internal vigilance.
It was. Which on one hand is good, but on the other, it raises a big question. If the system was really robust, why was the main safeguard another person noticing something odd, rather than, say, an automated flag?
It shows you how much they were relying on human integrity over technical controls.
I think so.
And here's a really telling detail. When this housing officer was finally confronted with the evidence, with the proof of those 35 dodgy allocations, what was their response?
It was immediate.
Instantaneous. They resigned, right there on the spot.
Which tells you a lot, doesn't it? There was no defense, no contesting the evidence, just resignation. It suggests they knew the game was up.
Right. It feels like an attempt to stop any further internal investigation, even though obviously that doesn't stop the criminal proceeding.
Not at all. That was already in motion.
Okay, so let's pivot to the impact, because this is where the number 35 becomes so significant. We have to connect this betrayal to the bigger picture in Newham.
And that context is just inescapable. Newham has one of the highest levels of housing need in London. Every single property allocation is a life-changing decision.
This isn't just some administrative inconvenience we're talking about.
No, it's a structural crisis.
Yeah.
Demand just completely outstrips supply.
And when you look at the human scale of this, the numbers are, well, they're staggering. We're talking about over 7,500 households right now living in temporary accommodation.
And we use that term, temporary accommodation or TA, a lot.
Yeah.
But it's worth pausing on what that actually means for a family.
It's not secure housing.
Not at all. It's high-cost emergency housing. It can mean being put in an expensive, insecure private rental. Or sometimes, in the worst cases, a bed and breakfast.
Often miles away from their kids' schools, their jobs, their support networks.
Right. And all that instability and that high cost it falls right back onto the council's budget.
Which brings us to the financial story here. Providing this kind of emergency housing for over 7,500 households, it's not just a line item on a budget, it's a hemorrhage of public money.
A massive one. The sources confirm the council is spending roughly $100 million a year.
£100 million.
Every single year, just to keep those families in temporary accommodation.
Let that number sink in.
I mean, think about that. $100 million. If that money was available for building, they could be creating hundreds of new, permanent, secure social homes every year.
But instead, that 9-figure sum is it's going into high-con short-term fixes, often just subsidizing private landlords.
It perfectly shows why getting back every single one of those 35 homes isn't just a moral issue. It's a financial imperative.
It also highlights the pressure cooker environment, doesn't it? When a council is spending that much, the desperation for any available permanent property is immense.
And desperation becomes a kind of currency. That's the environment where this kind of opportunity presents itself to someone on the inside.
And the human consequence of this scarcity is maybe the most damning part of the story. Because the supply of local homes is so exhausted, the council actually had to change its policy recently.
This is a huge deal.
It is. This policy change means that some families who have waited patiently, done everything right, they may now be forced to move to housing outside of London.
So social displacement.
It's social displacement enforced by scarcity. Can you imagine being told you have to uproot your family, move hours away from your community, and then you find out that 35 perfectly good local homes were basically stolen?
It just adds such a layer of insult to injury. It fundamentally breaks your faith that the queue is fair.
Exactly.
If you're a family playing by the rules and the system fails you not because of a lack of resources, but because of corruption, well, the system is broken. The council has to recover the homes, sure, but they also have to recover that trust.
So let's talk about that. The council's response. Officially, their public stance is loud and clear. A zero-tolerance approach to fraud.
Well, zero tolerance is a phrase that's easy to say after the fact.
Yeah.
The real test is the action plan.
And it seems to be multi-pronged. It's not just firing someone.
No, it has to be a full legal offensive, and it's moving on 2 parallel tracks.
Okay, so what are they?
First, they're working with the Met Police. That's the criminal investigation into the former employee. That's for accountability for convictions.
Right.
But second, and just as important, is the civil legal action. That's already underway, and its specific goal is to get those 35 homes back.
That must be incredibly complicated, though, trying to reclaim 35 homes that are already occupied. Can they actually be recovered quickly?
It's a really nuanced legal battle.
Yeah.
In civil court, the council has to prove the original allocation was fraudulent and therefore void.
Okay.
But then they have to deal with the people living there now. Were they in on the fraud? Or were they victims themselves who maybe paid someone they thought was legitimate?
I see. So if they were innocent victims, it becomes much harder to just evict them.
Much longer and much more complicated than if they're found to be co-conspirators. So it's not a simple process at all.
So beyond punishment and recovery, what about prevention? The source material says the council is reviewing its internal security so this system manipulation can't happen again.
And that review is the most critical part, long term. It has to focus on tightening the security of the systems themselves. They need technical fixes, not just relying on people, to be honest.
Like what? What would that look like?
Things like requiring dual authorization for any high-priority allocation. Or maybe a digital log that automatically flags any manual change to a priority score. The weakness has been exposed, so the fix has to be structural.
Of course, we have to acknowledge that the council can't answer every single question right now.
No. Absolutely not. It's a live legal case. So they're restricted from giving specific details about the people involved. That's just standard procedure to protect the integrity of the investigation.
Okay, so let's try to bring this all together. What does this mean in the wider context? What have we really learned today?
Well, I think we see this confluence of crises.
Yeah.
You have the internal betrayal of trust from an employee who abused their power.
Right. Then you have the crucial role of the whistleblower, who was the one to actually start the correction.
And then underneath it all, you have that dramatic financial burden, that $100 million a year cost that's being driven by the bigger structural housing crisis.
So the biggest takeaway for me is how fraud in this kind of high-pressure environment, it just multiplies the public suffering.
It has a geometric effect.
Yeah.
And getting back the 35 homes is essential, but that only treats the symptom of the corruption. The real challenge for Newham is twofold.
Go on.
First, they have to manage that $100 million annual spend on temporary housing. And second, They have to somehow restore public trust in one of the most basic functions of local government, the fair allocation of homes.
So the ultimate question isn't just about punishing one person. It's about completely re-engineering the allocation process, making it technically ungameable, I guess.
Making it immutable, so that when a vulnerability like this is exposed, it can be eliminated for good, not just patched over.
What happens to the integrity of the whole social contract when the gatekeepers themselves can't be trusted? That is the rebuilding task ahead of them.
A structural failure that demands a structural fix.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the crisis this fraud has exposed. We'll be keeping a close eye on the legal proceedings and the council's response as the story unfolds.